We've talked a lot in here, and hopefully, I really hope that it's resonated with you, that it is not just about listening to these lessons. It is about incorporating them into our lives. And you go back to the first class, you might remember we talked about reasons people get married. And there are all kinds of reasons that people get married. But a couple of them that tried to say, here should be the real reason that you get married, is one, the true meaning of a helpmate. Somebody that's going to help you get to heaven. A person that's going to strengthen you spiritually. And another reason to get married is because of what marriage itself provides, and that's the training ground. We call it like a spiritual gym for an individual to learn how to perfect themselves for their walk in the Christian life. When you marry yourself to somebody, all of a sudden that relationship between you and your husband, Christ, comes alive. And there's a little secular story that about an individual that I'd like to, if you'll bear with me, take about 5 minutes and run through to hopefully make this resonate with us a little bit. Abraham Lincoln is held up as an example of perseverance. He was born in a one-room cabin on a farm to a farmer. If you know much about him, his life didn't seem to go so good. Ran and failed 8 times in his elections, had 2 failed business attempts, battled nervous breakdown. And as bad as those things were, that wasn't the toughest thing that he had to face in life. The toughest thing he faced in life was when he married Mary Todd. If you know about her, she was the complete opposite of him from where she came from in life. Her family was one of the aristocrats. And she went on to tell, not long after they married, tell Lincoln that, if you're anything in this life, you have a 2-story house, and we only have a 1-story house. But Abraham Lincoln would never give in to it. So what happens when he goes away for 2 or 3 weeks? She goes, grabs a contractor, and puts a second floor on her house. As he makes it over to the White House, it seems like things just got more and more difficult with all of her little temper tantrums and all the issues that she was causing. Said that the maids or the women that would attend to her, they couldn't keep them employed because she'd run them all off. Abraham Lincoln wound up going around and giving each of them an extra $1 a week, saying, please stay, don't leave Mary. There was a time when a salesman came to the White House and to call on her for whatever reason, and she wore him out. And he actually, things were different back then, he actually goes up to Lincoln's office to say, you cannot believe what I have been through, what she has done to me, what she has said to me. Abraham Lincoln told him, says, you have endured 15 minutes what I've endured for 15 years. You'll be okay. She was known that one time she bought 100 pairs of gloves. She went way over budget for what Congress gave her for remodeling the White House. And if all of that wasn't enough, things got even worse for them when their son, her favorite son, suddenly passed away. She went on to be somebody that would publicly humiliate him, was known to have thrown coffee on him out in a public setting once. So how's he going to deal with all of this? And when all of this is happening and they had lost their son, it was the time that he was ready to go to Gettysburg and give his famous speech. And so he leaves Washington, and Gary Thomas writes this. He says, it was in the aftermath of the tremendous grief of losing their son that she fell apart. And then Lincoln was called on to give that speech that would mark him for posterity. Lincoln's political life was as precarious at this point as was his home life. As the Civil War drug on, Abe's political favor crashed. And when told that the president would address the crowd at Gettysburg, gathering to commemorate the fallen soldiers, a fellow politician scoffed, let the dead bury the dead. Shortly before Lincoln left for Gettysburg, their other son, Tad, had become ill, and this once again intensified Mary's hysterics. And she was newly reminded of the son that they had lost less than 2 years ago. With all the distractions at home, Lincoln was able merely to scribble out a few notes as he left for Pennsylvania. In this highly emotional moment, Lincoln could be forgiven for delivering his words with less than powerful rhetoric. One reporter described Lincoln's delivery as a sharp, unmusical treble voice. The applause was scattered and restrained, so much so that Lincoln believed he had failed miserably. He leaned over and told a friend, "It is a flat failure, and the people are disappointed." But the words were true and genuine, and they were moving and powerful. And as the newspapers recorded them without Lincoln's understandable gloom coloring them, the nation was inspired as never before. And the Gettysburg Address is one of the most famous speeches ever delivered on American soil. And those words would eventually be carved into stone and accompany Lincoln into posterity. It may be a cliche to say this, but it's still true. He shone brightest when his personal life was darkest. You know, when you think about the blessings of marriage, it's often said, behind every great man is a great woman. Not true. And Abraham Lincoln proves it. When you go in history and you look at the greatest presidents, Lincoln, if he's not the top, is always in that group at the top. And if you look up who are the worst first ladies in history, she is at the top. And so Gary Thomas went on to write in his book called Sacred Marriage that a bad marriage made Lincoln a better man. And he says this: the connection one can make between Lincoln's marriage and his mission is not difficult. It's easy to see how a man who might quit on a difficult marriage would not have the character to hold together a crumbling nation. Lincoln was virtually obsessed with saving the Union. What better training ground than the difficult marriage that required such tenacity for him? And so I say all that to say that's exactly what we have said in here is our goal for everybody. That marriage is a spiritual gymnasium. It is the opportunity to fine-tune yourself for what lies ahead. And Abraham Lincoln did. We talked about Job last week and what he dealt with his wife, and how that must have helped him go on to be the man that he is. And so when you consider, when you go to the gym and you physically exercise, the tougher you exercise, the stronger you get. And so the tougher situations that we deal with in this life, in our marriages, the more equipped we will be for what we face. And that's very true as we talk about the fruit of the Spirit, in particular what we come to now with meekness. Because I really believe, all the ones we've talked about are really important, but to be able to master meekness is something to behold. It is, without a doubt, one of the toughest ones. Meekness in the Bible, if you look at the Greek word for it, and I will say this 10 different ways as we go through this list. I even listened to a little guy on YouTube try to pronounce it. And there's some guy from Egypt or somewhere, so that didn't help at all. I like this. So the Greek word pratis, Barclay says, is one of the most untranslatable words in the New Testament. It typically gets translated as meekness, humility, and gentleness. But all of those words, while they have benefit to helping us understand what this Greek word means, have their own shortcomings and don't totally secure what that Greek word means there. When you think about meekness, what's the downside sometimes of the way people think of meekness? Yes, absolutely. When you look at some of the synonyms for it, tame, timid, mild, bland, unambitious, retiring, docile, acquiescent, repressed, suppressed, spiritless, broken, and wimpish. It's not a very good group of synonyms, is it? So meekness in one sense fails because of the way that we look at the word. Humility is not a bad translation of the word. It is rooted in the proper understanding of self, which humility talks about. Gentleness is, again, part of the idea because the Greek word, the focus of it is how you deal with other people, and it must be done in a gentle way. But the key idea or the key concept of the word is strength under control. This individual that we know is a great philosopher defines meekness: the ability to bear reproaches and slights with moderation, and not to this word that it is the ability to bear reproaches and slights with moderation, and not to embark on revenge quickly, and not to be easily provoked to anger, but to be free from bitterness and contentiousness, having tranquility and stability in spirit. So hopefully that, as we go through this, hopefully you can get a better concept of what that Greek word means when we put all of this together. When you think of the word meek, it's probably a passage that pops immediately to your mind, and that's what Jesus said in Matthew 5:5 in the Sermon on the Mount. He said, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Again, you say, well, for the people sitting around, did they understand what that meant? Well, Jesus goes on and describes it. Let me back up first. Where he says, "You have heard that it was said of those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you, to everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable for judgment." So he begins to start setting it apart that it's, to be meek, it's more about your attitude and controlling rather than just the action of doing. And then he goes on further and says, along the same lines, "And you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other to him also." So what's he saying? The meek man controls his anger, controls his tongue. He does not seek revenge, but rather reconciliation and peace with his brother. So that raises a question. Does a meek man ever get angry? I mean, what we've looked at here from what Jesus has said, it's like, don't be angry. You got to control yourself. Well, is that the total concept of it? Can a meek person get angry? Let me go back to Aristotle again, the way he actually described that Greek word when it comes to anger, and says, it does not say that Aristotle spoke further about Paralytus, saying that it can get angry, but on the right grounds and against the right person and in the right manner and at the right moment and for the right length of time. And I think you'll see that developed as we go through this. So to kind of, again, set up what meekness is and what we're saying, it is somebody that is gentle. It is somebody that shows humility. It is somebody that is able to control their emotions rather than have their emotions control them. And in everything that they do within it, their goal is to honor God. So when you think about, and see, it's going to mess up because I flashed it up there, so you probably saw it. So if you were going to be asked, who wants to be a millionaire, and they phone you for their phone a friend, who in the Old Testament does it say is the meekest man that ever lived?
That would be Moses.
That would be Moses. Good reader. Do you remember from in Numbers, the 12th chapter? There's Moses, the leader of God's people, when he's challenged by his brother and sister, Aaron and Miriam. And they get jealous that he's in control and he's getting all this favor amongst the people. And as they come out and challenge him, what does Moses say about it? Nothing. There they are trying to lead a revolt against him, and he doesn't say anything. What does God do? God strikes Miriam with leprosy. Then Moses says something. God, please take the leprosy away from her. So does that mean that Moses never got angry as a meek man? No. Well, think about when he comes off Mount Sinai in Exodus, the 32nd chapter. He comes down bringing the tablets, and he sees the children of Israel. They form the golden calf, and that's what they've started doing with their worship. And what's he do? Throws them down, busts them, grinds it up, mixes it with water, tells them to drink it. It says, who stands with me with God? And the Levites come up with him. And he says, go kill your brother. And they go out and kill 3,000 people. What's the difference? Is he meek? What's the difference in those two situations? There's a striking difference that explains a lot about meekness between those two individuals. What is it? Well, in one of them, whose honor was at stake?
His.
Exactly. Moses' honor is at stake when Aaron and Miriam come up against him. And then the other one, whose honor is at stake? God's honor. When it comes to God's honor, Moses wasn't given an inch. You are not going against Jehovah, and I'm not giving in to anything that you want. I will die before that happens. But when it comes to himself, his pride, his own worth, if I die, I die. Not because of standing up for that, because he doesn't value it as important. He's willing to be, as we would say, walked all over and accused of everything. Think about the Apostle Paul as well. I think we think of Paul as a kind of a fiery individual, and very much so. In Acts 14th chapter, after he was stoned and left for dead at Lystra, what did he do? Retreat. I'm getting up and I'm going to Derby and I'm preaching some more. In Acts the 19th chapter, when he was in Ephesus and the riot was taking place and everybody's like, let's get Paul, let's lynch him. What does Paul want to do? I'm going right there in the midst of it. What did his brethren do? Hold him back. When he's talking to Timothy, first of all, as far as the Galatians go, when they were being accosted by false teachers, he told them, but even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be accursed, as we have said before. So now I say, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to the one you received, let him be accursed. That's a meek man saying that because of what he's doing on behalf of God. And when he talks to Timothy, he told Timothy, you fight the good fight of faith. You preach the word in season, out of season. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a power of love and self-control. It is game on. You march straight forward. But then the same man says to Timothy, and the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, correcting his opponent with gentleness. Look at the difference when it comes to Timothy, the way it is when you're attacked. When it's talking about enduring evil there, it's not talking about Satan, not the attack on God, but mean people doing something to you, people that just want to hurt you. You endure it. You deal with it. That's what meekness does. When it is on you, you take it. And again, that word gentleness there is our Greek word. So where does Paul get this from? It's an easy answer. It's always the right answer. Jesus, that's right. In 2 Corinthians 10:1, I, Paul, myself entreat you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ. That's where Paul got it from. That's where Paul learned it from. So, was Jesus meek? Obviously, I think we know the answer is that yes. What passages come to your mind when you think of Jesus being meek? What did he say of himself? I am meek and lowly in heart. Then prophecy concerning Christ says, he will not quarrel or cry aloud, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not quench. Other prophecy about him is one that we're very familiar with. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, like a sheep that is before its shears is silent. So he opened not his mouth. How did that come true? How did he not open his mouth?
When he's accused by the council of blasphemy and other matters, he would not respond to them. And even before Pilate, all he ever said to Pilate was, "My kingdom is not of this world." And when Pilate asked him about being a king, he said, you said it, you got it right. That's all he ever said. Nothing else that he ever responded to.
Yeah. 6 witnesses at the trial and crucifixion of Jesus that did exactly what John's talking about. They did not find anything wrong with him. Pilate, 3 times in Luke 23. I find no guilt in this man. You brought this man as one who was misleading the people, and after examining him before you, behold, I did not find this man guilty of any of your charges against him. And then the 3rd time, why? What evil has he done? I have found no guilt deserving of death. Pilate's wife even said, he is a righteous man. Pilate said, Herod sent him to me because he can't find anything wrong with him. And then what happens when he goes to the cross? What's the thief say? Do you not, to the other thief, do you not fear God since you're under the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we're receiving the due reward for our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong. And then the centurion, finally the centurion says, certainly this man was innocent. And then you could even, because of God's silence, the same kind of statement, that my son was innocent, when you look at how he turned the sky dark and everything, and there was just a period of quiet. But John said he didn't have to say anything. He fulfilled his prophecy completely. These were personal attacks against him. He is the ultimate example of meekness. He didn't respond to it. Just like Moses. Just like Paul's telling Timothy. A personal attack? No. But when you think about Christ's entire life, what is a time when you say, hey, he got angry then? The money changers in the temple. No. And what did he say? My Father's house is a house of prayer, and you have made it a den of thieves. So there again we see he is defending his Father. He is defending what is right, and he justly, righteously shows anger in the right way. So again, understanding meekness, understand when it is and how it controls itself in those situations. So what's this mean to, when you think about it, what's all of this mean to Josh?
Well, I just think it's really interesting that it really highlights how fine of a line meekness is. I mean, nobody would deny that Jesus was the most meek. However, he had a pretty sharp tongue. He cut people down, and he was always speaking the truth. He was always justifying what he was saying. But you might look at some of those interactions and say, well, that's not really displaying meekness, because he's, more than happy to put people in their place, So I just think that's such a hard balance, I think.
It is. It's tough. It is tough. I mean, we have to know. Jesus, of course, knows what's in somebody's heart, and he knows what their ultimate goal was. And so he obviously is going to have an advantage that we don't have in those situations. But again, when it comes to something of a spiritual nature, it is holding the line. It is not giving an inch just to make somebody feel good. But when it comes down to, is it a personal type of thing? Then yeah. Then we can be for lack of better terms, we can be a doormat for the sake of helping that person. And that really goes into then how does this, what does this mean to you and me? What do we take from it? Look at 1 Peter 2, 18 through 23. When you go back to the first century church and what people were dealing with during the first century, I think it is very hard for us to truly comprehend what that was like. when the majority of the known world at that time is in slavery. And of course, we have books like Philemon, where Onesimus is sent back to Philemon, a runaway slave. And Paul's telling him, you're going back. And Onesimus has got to be like, you got to be kidding me. I'm going back? Yeah, you're going back. Because you have a responsibility to obey the laws and be the good example that you need to be. And knowing that that's going on, and knowing that these people are beaten, maybe they do something and, according to a slave owner, they deserve to be beaten. But that's not the case all the time. Often they're beaten just because the master has a bad day. And Peter addresses it in the scope of what we're talking about here with meekness. 1 Peter 2:18-23, servants, be subject to your masters with all respect, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the unjust. For this is a gracious thing. When mindful of God, one endures sorrows while suffering unjustly. For what credit is it if, when you sin and are beaten for it, you endure? But if when you do good and suffer for it, you endure, this is a gracious thing in the sight of God. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example that you might follow in his steps. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. And when he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. So what is that? Does that not just lay out exactly what we just talked about? The ultimate example for these Christians who are being whipped unjustly. He says, you endure it because it's a gracious thing, because of the light that's going to be shown towards God. And you have a perfect example of somebody that did it. Now take it a little bit, okay, so that's slavery. So, okay, well, what about a situation that's not quite that tough? How about husbands and wives? And what's he say in the next chapter? Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives. When they see your respectful and pure conduct, do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair, the wearing of gold, or the putting on of clothing. But let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. And that word gentle there, the beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, again, is our Greek word there. So what is the purpose of meekness here by this wife in this setting? What are the two goals or motivations for her to do so? In a rough situation, why be meek? Why is Peter telling this Christian woman who's married to this unbeliever who may or not be treating her bad, why does he tell her to act the way that she should? Two reasons.
So that her conduct will be general.
Yeah, number one, you know what? He may look at it and go, there's something different about you. And how many times have you heard that in life when somebody says, you know what, there's just something different about that person. I want to find out about that. I want what they've got. Peter says that may very well happen. You may win him to Christ. What's the second thing?
Be pleasing to God.
To be pleasing to God. An imperishable beauty of a gentle, our word there, and quiet spirit. To God, that's very precious. And ultimately, isn't that what our life is about? To glorify God? To be that shining light? So, that's kind of a big picture of meekness and what it looks like and what we're called to do. So all right, so let's start, I guess you'd say, narrowing it down and bringing it home in a little bit more of applicable ways to us. What does it look like in marriage? Number one problems in marriage, say today, is finances. Money, money, money. And how do we deal with it and all the arguments that take place with it. How does that play out in the spirit of meekness? If you and we'll say somebody not in this class, if you were going to talk to them, and they were having problems and they were arguing over money, how would meekness come into play based on what we said? So oftentimes the issue is just control. You know, this person wants control of this person wants control of that. How does meekness come into play in this equation?
You don't always get your way.
Heart to pride.
Sorry.
Yeah, you don't always get your way. It's pride. Exactly. And that pride is the antithesis of what Moses was showing when he was standing there being attacked by Aaron and Miriam. He wasn't interested in pride. He emptied himself of it. And so ultimately that's what we're called to do in a situation like this when there's a conflict. Who from the Old Testament shows that? How about Abraham? What in his life showed that?
His dealings with Lot.
Yeah. Lot, you know, we got all this land before us. You pick what you want. You go left, I'll go right. You go right, I'll go left. I'm not worried about it. He had no pride in the situation. It was not of a spiritual thing. He was willing to empty himself of it. And as a result, because of that, they had no issue. He was more concerned about the type of perspective on a pilgrim, his mentality of where he ultimately was going, not where he was going in that physical time. About forgiveness. How does it come into play there? Anybody having a problem forgiving somebody sometime? Why? Why do you have a problem forgiving somebody sometime? Pride. When it comes back to self, it's pride. Absolutely. I mean, think of the prodigal son. The prodigal son goes to a foreign land, you know, does everything wrong, wastes all his money on prostitutes and wild living, comes home, dad kills the fatted calf, puts the ring on him, puts the robe on him, have a celebration, and her brother's like, you've got to be kidding me. He couldn't forgive him, could he? Because of pride. In our marriages, when you get so stuck on not being able to get over something, what ultimately is it? It's a sign of not being meek. I cannot allow myself to be walked on. I cannot endure it. I just can't. Well, then you got to look at yourself and ask, am I truly being meek? What did Christ do at his trial?
And actually, that has to flow both directions because it requires meekness on the part of one individual to admit they're wrong. And then it requires meekness on the other part, on the part of the other individual to acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm.
And even there may be some hurt involved to work through that. So,
Yeah, if you couldn't hear John, it takes meekness on both sides. The person to stand up and say, I was wrong. Not that I'm going to win in this situation. I was wrong. And then it takes the other person being willing to let go of it. And again, if the person won't admit they're wrong, you still have to be willing to forgive. And it takes meekness on both sides. And for the sake of time, we won't frustrations and just disputes, things that take place. And I think it's along the same lines. How about kids? How about when you got a bunch of little munchkins running around the house and everybody's frazzled? What's an example of where meekness comes into play with that?
Well, there are times when
Therefore,
little
rid
ones
yourselves of all
complain.
malice and all deceit and
they can't wait, you know.
Yeah.
The little one needs to eat, the little one needs a diaper change, the little one needs to, you have to follow through with discipline. And whichever of the partner isn't doing that is gonna have to, I guess it kind of goes along with the selfishness of pride, but you're gonna have to step back for a minute because the child, it's more urgent need. And sometimes that's hard, maybe more for a new father to be kind of in second place,
Yeah.
kind of for a while, because the needs of the baby are pressing.
There is meekness all over the place with kids. It is being willing to step back. It is being willing to step up and put off what you want to do to help mom who is absolutely at wit's end. It's being willing to do for your children. You know what, I'm tired, I don't want to take them to this event that they need to go to because there's going to be other young Christians there. You know, there's all kinds of things that ultimately it comes down to, am I willing to not let self enter in?
Scott, it's also where we're gonna mess up a lot, and we have to deal with that.
Yeah. And be willing to admit it. What do you do when you wrong your child? Say, I wronged you, I'm sorry, and ask for forgiveness.
I also think meekness with kids is really big with punishment because you have to be consistent, or you can't just get mad, well, I'm really upset this time, so they're going to get punished for this. But you have to be meek, and the example with righteous anger, you did this is a lie. Jesus tells us that lying is wrong, so you're getting punished for this, not because you're angry and you made her mad.
This is not to contradict what she just said, because I agree with you. But we have close friends that they gave me this idea. They're very close believers, and they said sometimes when their kids misbehave, they will go through the lesson with them about why it was wrong, but they will take on the consequences to be an example for what Christ did for us. And I just thought that was like super powerful. I haven't done that with my kids yet, but one day maybe.
I'm glad my kids are out of the house. I didn't hear that. That's a good one. Serendipity. Gary Henry, in one of his Diligently Seeking God articles, talked about serendipity. And that's when you find something that you're not looking for. Jesus told his disciples, for whoever would save his life will lose it. Whoever will lose his life for my sake will find it. It probably makes a little bit more sense to you when you think about the different phrases you've heard before. You win by losing. You go up by going down. The last shall be first. Those who weep shall laugh. The poor will be rich, and the meek inherit the earth. When you think about meek inheriting the earth, going back to one of the first passages we looked at, the meek typically, again, you're thinking, the world thinks this is somebody that gets walked on. They're willing to say, I'll step aside. I'll let you have it. I don't have to be first in line. And so from that standpoint, you think they're not going to be successful. But ultimately, in the end, the person that is meek and has that proper attitude towards their spouse, towards their friends, they're happy. They are the one that's happy, and they've got it all. They're not the one sitting there arguing with their spouse over this or that, and just everything's in ultimate turmoil. That's what Christ is saying, the meek shall inherit the earth. You think you're losing out? You're going to get it all. And so ask yourselves, am I meek? But then ask yourself, if you say, yes, I'm meek, okay, but then you ask yourself, when my buttons are being pushed, when I'm really getting frazzled, am I meek then? And if you still think yes, then think, does my spouse think so? Do my friends think so? And that's a good test for each of us. It's not me, I have a hard time looking out in this room and seeing anybody I don't think is me. But when we're away from everybody and something doesn't go our way, are we meek? And so for this next week, for the next period of time, you truly evaluate yourself when those type of things happen, am I meek? And you think back to Christ being wrongly accused of everything and being willing not to say anything for the sake of others. So in our marriages, are we willing to do that for the sake of my spouse, for the sake of my family? Am I willing to say that? Psalms 149:4, for the Lord takes pleasure in his people, and he will beautify the meek with salvation. Takeaways, again, how's your anger? Do you strive to be meek? Do I see my marriage as that training ground for my spiritual growth? And are your efforts, as we've asked before, helping to redeem your spouse? That is your responsibility to your spouse, is to get them to heaven. Are you doing it? So have you been applying these fruits of the Spirit? Let me go back to a couple of quotes we said at the start. When we choose not to seek our expectations, but rather place all our focus on helping our spouse, then we'll be able to find happiness and fulfill God's plan for our marriage. Is that not the definition of meekness right there? When I empty myself, that's when I'm going to find happiness. Successful marriages are those where at least one partner has surrendered his or her rights to personal happiness and self-gratification. When you decide to be meek, that's when your marriage is going to be sweet. All right. We're going to talk about self-control, the last of the fruit of the Spirit on Sunday morning. Thank you all.